Kathleen Savio wrote the letter in November 2002. She addressed it to an assistant state's attorney in Will County, Illinois. In it, she described her husband's escalating violence, and she asked for protection. She was 38 years old. 16 months later, she was found dead in her bathtub, and her death was ruled an accident. Her husband was a sergeant on the Bolingbrook police force. That is the part of this story people struggle with most. Not that a woman was killed, that she saw it coming, wrote it down, handed it to the justice system in her own handwriting, and it still took 8 more years and a second missing wife before anyone acted on it. This video is about 5 men who were trusted completely: a police sergeant, a Methodist pastor, the security director of a national ministry, a high school football coach, a church elder who was also the town dentist. Every one of them was convicted or pleaded to killing someone close to him, and in almost every case the reputation is not incidental to the crime. The reputation is the weapon. It is what made the warning signs unbelievable, including to the people watching them happen. None of these are composite characters. Every name here belongs to a real person, every death was investigated, and every case ended in a courtroom, which means the details can be checked rather than felt. That matters because the version of this story that circulates online is usually about instinct. The sense that something is off, the feeling you should have trusted. The record says something less comforting. In these cases, the warning signs were not vague feelings. They were letters, injuries, emails, timelines, and forensic findings. They existed on paper. What failed was not perception. It was what happened after somebody perceived it correctly and said so out loud. There is real research behind this, and we will get to it. But start with Kathleen. Section 1. The Sergeant. Drew Peterson had been a Bolingbrook police officer for close to 3 decades. He was a sergeant. He had commendations. When Kathleen Savio told people she was afraid her husband would kill her, she was describing a man who wore the uniform they would have to call for help. Savio's marriage to Peterson ended badly, in a divorce still unresolved over property when she died. On the 1st of March 2004, she was found dead in her bathtub. The initial finding was accidental drowning. The case closed. It reopened in October 2007 when Peterson's 4th wife, Stacy, disappeared. Stacy Peterson has never been found, and Drew Peterson has never been charged in connection with her disappearances. That is important, and we will not blur it. But her disappearance did cause investigators to exhume Kathleen Savio's body and look again. The second examination reclassified her death as a homicide. The problem prosecutors then faced was that they had no physical evidence tying Peterson to the bathroom, and no witness who put him there. What they had were the things Kathleen Savio had said and written while she was alive, to her sister, to police, to that assistant state's attorney. Ordinarily, in an American courtroom, those statements are hearsay, and hearsay is not admissible, because the person who made it cannot be cross-examined. In 2008, Illinois passed a statute allowing such statements in narrow circumstances, where a judge finds the person was killed to prevent their testimony. The press named it Drew's Law. On the 6th of September 2012, a jury convicted Drew Peterson of the first-degree murder of Kathleen Savio. He was sentenced to 38 years. The conviction has been upheld on appeal. 4 years later, in 2016, he was convicted of soliciting the murder of James Glasgow, the prosecutor who convicted him. That added 40 years. Kathleen Savio was believed eventually. It took her body being taken back out of the ground. Section 2. The Pastor. Arthur Burton Shermer was a United Methodist minister in Pennsylvania, in a pulpit for decades, the kind of man whose name appears on the front of a church bulletin. Prosecutors would later call him the sinister minister, but nobody in his congregation was calling him anything of the kind while it was happening. On the 15th of July 2008, Shermer told police his wife Betty had been badly injured in a low-speed traffic accident. She died of head injuries. The story held. What broke it was unrelated. Later that year, a man named Joseph Musante shot himself in the church office after learning of his wife's relationship with the pastor. A state trooper investigating that death began looking at the pastor's own history and did not like what he saw in the account of Betty's car accident. The injuries did not match a low-speed collision. In January 2013, a jury convicted Shermer of first-degree murder and tampering with evidence in Betty's death. Prosecutors argued he had struck her with a crowbar in the parsonage garage, loaded her into the car, and staged the crash. He received a life sentence. Then there was his first wife. Jewel Shermer died in 1999. Shermer said she fell down the basement stairs while vacuuming her. He was indicted in her death in 2012, and he later entered a plea of no contest to third-degree murder, receiving 20 to 40 years. A no-contest plea is not a confession, and it is not a jury verdict, and it deserves to be described precisely. It is a defendant declining to contest the charge. 2 wives, 9 years apart, both dying in domestic accidents in the home of a minister. It took the second one and an unrelated suicide before anyone counted them together. Section 3. The man who guarded a ministry. Christopher Coleman was the security director for a large Missouri-based ministry. He earned a 6-figure salary protecting a famous televangelist. He was a former Marine. He and his wife Sherry had 2 sons, Garrett, who was 11, and Gavin, who was 9. For months before the murders, the Coleman family had been receiving threats, notes, messages, menacing emails aimed at Chris because of his work. He reported them. Police took them seriously, as anyone would. On the 5th of May 2009, Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin were found strangled in their beds in the family's home in Columbia, Illinois. Threats were spray-painted on the walls. It looked exactly like the danger Chris Coleman had been warning everyone about for months. Investigators traced the earlier threatening messages back to Coleman's own network. Prosecutors told the jury he had manufactured a stalker, in writing, over months, to build a suspect who did not exist. The motive they presented was an affair with a longtime friend of his wife and a job with a morality clause that a divorce would have cost him. He was convicted on the 5th of May 2011, exactly 2 years to the day after the killings, and sentenced to life without parole. The conviction was upheld on appeal. The threats are the detail worth sitting with. He did not only kill his family, he spent months building a story in advance that everyone around him, including the police, would carry for him afterward. When the murders happened, the investigation did not have to be misled. It had already been preloaded with a suspect, by a man whose actual job was security, and whose credibility on the subject of threats was the highest in the room. That is the shape this keeps taking. Not a lie told under pressure at the scene, but a story installed early, in a voice nobody had reason to doubt. Section 4. The Coach. Belinda Temple was 30 years old, a high school teacher, and 8 months pregnant. On the 11th of January 1999, she was shot to death in a closet in her home outside Houston. The scene was arranged to look like a burglary. Her husband, David Temple, coached high school football. He was liked. He was, by every account of the time, exactly the kind of man a community builds a Friday night around. Prosecutors said he killed his wife because he was involved with another teacher, a woman he later married. Temple was convicted in 2007. That should be the end of it, but it is not, and the rest matters. In 2016, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals threw out that conviction, finding that the prosecution had withheld evidence from the defense. That is a failure by the state, not a finding that Temple was innocent, and the distinction is the entire point of an appeals system. He was retried. In August 2019, a second jury convicted him of murder. That jury deadlocked on punishment, and a mistrial was declared on sentencing alone. It took a third punishment proceeding in 2023 before he was sentenced to life. His appeals have since been denied. 24 years, 3 juries, 1 conviction overturned, and 1 rebuilt. That is what it took, in a case with a body, a scene, and a suspect from day one. Section 5. The Elder. In May 1991, in Castle Rock, Northern Ireland, 2 people were found dead in a fume-filled garage, Leslie Howell and Trevor Buchanan, a police officer. They were not married to each other. Leslie was married to Colin Howell, a dentist and a prominent member of Coleraine Baptist Church. Trevor was married to Hazel, a Sunday school teacher at the same church. The deaths were recorded as a suicide pact between 2 spouses who had discovered their partner's affair with each other. It is a story that explains itself, and it stood for 18 years. It ended because Colin Howell decided to tell it. In 2009, in personal and financial collapse, he confessed to elders of his church and then to police that he had killed both of them with carbon monoxide and arranged the scene. He pleaded guilty in November 2010 and was ordered to serve a minimum of 21 years. Hazel Stewart denied involvement, stood trial, and was convicted by a jury in 2011 with a minimum of 18 years. Howell also pleaded guilty to sexual assaults on female patients in his dental chair. Nobody caught Colin Howell, not in 1991 and not in the 18 years that followed. He was a church-going professional whose story matched a scene he had built, and for 18 years that was enough. The case was solved because he confessed, which is not a system working. Section 6. What the research actually says. Here is where a video like this usually starts inventing things, so we will be exact about what is known. In 2019, Professor Jane Lompton-Smith, a forensic criminologist at the University of Gloucestershire, published an 8-stage homicide timeline in the journal Violence Against Women, built from an examination of hundreds of cases of intimate partner homicide. The stages run from a pre-existing history of control and stalking, through a fast-moving commitment, through living under control, to a trigger, escalation, a change in the perpetrator's thinking, planning, and the killing itself. The finding that matters most in her work is not the sequence, it is what the sequence disproves. Crimes of passion, in her phrase, are largely a myth. Killers of this kind do not snap. The pattern is visible in advance, and it moves in one direction. The other body of evidence comes from the risk research pioneered by Jacqueline Campbell, whose danger assessment identified the factors most strongly associated with a partner being killed: escalation in frequency or severity of violence, threats to kill, prior use of a weapon, access to a firearm, and recent separation. Research on the timing is grim and consistent. A large share of these killings cluster around separation, often within the first weeks and months after a woman tries to leave. Read those two findings together and you get something that contradicts the usual advice. The most dangerous moment is not the years of quiet control, it is the exit. That is why the practical guidance from advocates is not confront him. It is document, plan, and get help from people trained for it before the moment of leaving, not after. There is a second thing the research changed, and it is legal rather than psychological. For most of the 20th century, the law in most countries could only see individual incidents: an assault, a threat, a broken door. It could not see a pattern of control because no single day in that pattern was necessarily a crime. Monitoring where someone goes, controlling their money, deciding who they may speak to, setting rules that are never spoken aloud but always enforced, none of that was chargeable. In England and Wales, that changed with the Serious Crime Act 2015, which created a specific offence of controlling or coercive behaviour in an intimate or family relationship, in force from the end of that year. Several other jurisdictions have followed. The reason it matters here is evidentiary. An offence built on a pattern makes a diary useful. It turns the very thing victims are most often told is not evidence, the accumulation of small things, into the thing a prosecutor can actually charge. Solosing. There is no evidence that abusers are more likely than anyone else to coach youth sports or serve on a church board. The pattern in these 5 cases is narrower than that and more uncomfortable. A strong public reputation does not prevent the private conduct. It absorbs the accusation when it comes. Kathleen Savio put it in writing to a prosecutor in 2002 and was ruled an accident in 2004. Betty Shermer's injuries did not match the crash her husband described, and it took an unrelated suicide in a church office to make anyone check. The Coleman family's stalker was invented by the man who reported him. Belinda Temple's case survived a burglary that was staged for the responding officers. Leslie Howell and Trevor Buchanan were filed as a suicide pact for 18 years. In every one of those, somebody's account was believed because of who was giving it. The thing worth taking from this is not suspicion of everyone you know, it is that a documented, dated, specific record outlives a reputation. Kathleen Savio's letter did not save her. It did help convict him, 10 years after she wrote it, in a courtroom she never got to sit in. If this story stayed with you, like this video and subscribe for more real cases every week. And if any of it sounded familiar, The National Domestic Violence Hotline in the United States is 1-800-799-7233.